All right, we have finally arrived at solving equations. Okay, so solving equations, we talked before when we talked about how variables, what they are. A variable is just a letter or a symbol that you use to replace a number. Sometimes you know what that number is, and sometimes you don't. So what happens when we have an equation is we have a variable in here, an unknown number, and we don't know what it is, so we want to try to figure out what it is. Sometimes it's pretty easy. Like this one, you could probably figure out what x is if you just thought about it for a minute. Okay, but sometimes you're going to end up with some pretty complicated equations, and you need to have a method that you can use to solve them. So that's what we're going to look at starting now. You've probably already done some solving equations, and if you have, that's awesome. Hopefully you remember how to do it, but we're going to review anyway. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know is about inverse operations. Okay, so inverse operations. Inverse operations are two operations that undo each other. Okay, just like how when we talked about integers, we talked about fires and buckets of water undoing each other. It's because those are inverses. They're not inverse operations though, they're just inverse numbers. Inverse operations are things like adding and subtracting and dividing and multiplying or taking a square root or using an exponent. Those are operations. Okay, so when we talk about our operations, the ones that we're going to focus on right now, first, multiplying and dividing are inverses, and adding and subtracting are inverses. Okay, and you know that's true because think about it. Think about for a second, how old are you? Now I want you to add 2 to your age. Now subtract 2 from that number. Okay, did you get back to your original age? Yeah, because adding 2 and then subtracting 2 cancels out. Okay, think about what your age is again. Think about multiplying that by 2. Now take that answer and divide it by 2. Did you get back to your age again? Yeah, of course you did, because multiplying and dividing cancel each other out. They're inverses. Okay, so that is what we're talking about when we talk about inverse operations. It's undoing an operation. Okay, now there's one other thing that you need to make sure that you're really careful of. This is the number one mistake that I see people make. Don't move the equal sign. Okay, you got to make sure that you keep that equal sign in the same spot. And sometimes people move it in really silly ways because they're not paying attention. Okay, our goal is to get the variable by itself so that we have what x equals, right? We want to figure out what value is this unknown number. So here's what we're going to do. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line going down where my equal sign is, because that's going to help me keep my equal sign in the same spot. Okay, you don't want to make that mistake of moving the equal sign. All right, now I'm going to solve this equation using inverse operations. Right now, this says that we are adding 2 to our unknown. We want to get that unknown by itself, so I want to get this adding 2 out of here. Okay, how am I going to do that? Well, the inverse operation of adding is subtracting. So I'm going to subtract 2. But if I do it on this side of the equation, I have to do it on that side of the equation as well. Okay, that is how equations work. If this equals that, and I'm going to subtract 2 from this over here, I got to subtract 2 over there as well. Okay, once I do that, these guys cancel each other out because they're inverses. I'm going to be left with just that x. I want to keep my equal sign right in the same spot. And then 10 minus 2 is 8. Okay, and that is the answer to my equation. All right, great. Let's take a look at another one. So this guy over here, I'm going to draw a line through my equal sign just to make sure I keep it in the same spot. And right now, this says that it's 3 times x. Well, the inverse operation of multiplication is division. So to solve this, I'm going to divide by 3. Now, I like to write divide by 3 like a fraction. So I'm going to write it like it looks like a fraction. You could also write it with like a division symbol like that if you wanted to. But personally, I just prefer this way. Okay, so these 3's are going to cancel each other out because multiplying by 3 and dividing by 3 cancel out, just like positive 2 and negative 2 cancel out. Okay, so that's going to leave me with just my x, my unknown over here, and then negative 9 divided by 3. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And if I think back to my multiplication and division bear, right, he's squinty. A negative and a positive, a negative and a positive. The answer is negative. So that's a -3 for my answer. All right, this guy down here. This one, don't forget that when you have a fraction like that, all that is division. Okay, so all that this guy is right here is that's division. Okay, so to solve this, if I want to get rid of the division, I'm going to have to multiply. So I'm going to multiply both sides of this equation by -3. So this says do y divided by -3. So I'm going to multiply by -3. And I like to write it on the outside like that. So dividing by 3 and multiplying by -3 cancel each other. That leaves me with just my y over here. And then -4 times -3, 4 times 3 is 12. And a negative times a negative is positive. So +12 is my answer. All right, last one. That kind of looks like a W. It's not. It's actually a Greek letter. I don't even remember what it's called, to be honest. But that's okay, because remember, our variables can either be numbers or symbols. It doesn't make a difference. So here's where my equal sign goes. And right now, I have that this says subtract 2 for my variable. So the inverse of that is going to be adding 2. So subtracting 2 and adding 2 cancel each other out. I'm left with just my cool looking W thing. And then -1 plus 2. Okay, so think about your fires and buckets of water. So I've got 1 fire and 2 buckets of water. Okay, well, bucket's going to put a fire out. I'm going to be left with 1 bucket of water. And that's it. That's my answer. Okay, so this is just basic solving. Just remembering those 2 pairs of inverse operations. You need to make sure you show your work. Okay, so I do want to see you writing in your steps like this of what you're doing. Okay, and just be really careful about your calculations that you don't do anything silly like adding or subtracting wrong.